Hey, I'm Daniel. I'm one of the head editors for Hazen's Yearbook for the 25 to 26 school year. I used to be a head photography editor, but now I'm a head editor. Despite that, I still do a lot of photography and videography and that sort of stuff. So I'm just making this video to show you editing software. In Yearbook, there are two main editing softwares that you're going to be using. You're going to be using Lightroom mainly, and then Photoshop. Lightroom, you're mainly using it to edit what's already in the photo and make changes to the photograph itself, versus Photoshop, where generally you're adding stuff to the photo or um, editing it more drastically. So kind of my first tip in this video is, on you have kind of two sides of Lightroom, or three sections, I guess you could say. You have this left section, you have your photo in the middle, and then you have your right section. In the left section, you can add your photos. You have this assisted calling feature, which just helps you sort through photos. So you can sort based on the subject focus, eye focus, eyes open, or you can reject photos based on exposure issues, misfires, or documents. And especially if you're dealing with large amounts of photos, this can really help you organize after a photo shoot or after a game or something like that. And I would say I personally use this. It does a good job, probably like 90% of the time. And the while it's great at what it does, I would still just check, especially the rejection part of what it's sorting through, just to make sure that you're not missing anything or it's not accidentally getting rid of a really good photo. But yeah, I would definitely use this. Then you have your two community tabs. You're not really needing any of these. There's This is kind of just like another tips and tricks thing. Or if you want to look at other people's photography to maybe get some inspiration for how to edit a photo, then of course you can go here. You can, and then you have kind of these two ways to sort photos. You have all of your photos and can sort on like when the photo is added, who's in it, even like your junk pile. And then you have your albums. Uh, I would definitely recommend using albums just to sort through all of your photos and the different events that you go to and everything like that. It's a lot, believe me, it's a lot easier to sort through the photos beforehand rather than manually doing it after uploading everything. So we're gonna be editing this photo from AAPI night. Now on the right side, we're gonna start with presets. So you can either click on this little icon or you can press P to open it up. I really recommend that you learn all of these like short keyboard shortcuts. It comes in really handy. Now there are kind of these three main sections of presets. There's your recommended presets, which it's basically whatever Lightroom thinks will look the best on your photo. There's your premium presets, which I'm not quite sure if the school district pays for like the premium version, but if you do, then you just have a bunch of presets in here. And then you have any presets that you've saved. You have like this basic folder of presets already added, but it's anything that you saved, or maybe if you've used a preset or made a preset yourself. Now, generally, you're not really making or using presets. Maybe if you're editing a bunch of photos from the same event with the same lighting and that type of stuff, then maybe you use a preset. Just so you're not having to constantly manually edit everything. but even then you're usually just like copy paste the edit settings. um but for our second main tab, it'll be the edit tab. Now there are 6 main sections here. You can either click on the icon or press E on your keyboard to bring it up. The first part is the auto edit. So you have this auto edit setting, which generally it does a good job. Again, kind of that 90% of the time, as long as the conditions aren't too challenging and you're dealing with a good baseline photo, then it'll usually do a pretty good job, as you can kind of see here. Think of it as any photos that you take on your phone camera, it'll kind of just even everything out. Nothing will really be too dark or too bright, just as it'll just make sure that you can see everything. Then you have your black and white mode. If you need a black and white photo, that's the simplest way to do it, instead of manually turning down all the color saturation, that type of stuff. And then you have your, here, let me reset this. And then you have your HDR, turning that on and off. HDR basically just adds more range for how light and color is processed. Generally, you stay in kind of this SDR range, but sometimes you might need to edit in HDR. I can't think of a reason why you'd need to, but don't get me wrong, there's definitely a couple situations where you might need to. Now, if the first main section is light, obviously, so you have these several dials here in your light section. Your exposure just indiscriminately raises or lowers the amount of light in the photo. Your contrast kind of does this more finely, especially with like the colors. So if something is red, then it'll make it even more red or even less red depending on what you change it to. You have your highlights, which just changes only the bright parts. You have your shadows, which changes only the dark parts. And then you have your whites and blacks, which is the same thing as highlights and shadows. They're just kind of a little bit more finely tuned. Then you have your curve, which it might be in this little section here and you have to pop it out. But generally you're wanting some type of like S curve, or it kind of just depends what you need. From there you can like change your red, greens, and blues if you want, but usually you just stick to this main page if you're using your curve at all. Generally you just using these sliders is enough. And then for the second section, which is color, there's a lot in here. Generally you'll just be using the temperature, making the image cooler or warmer, your tint greener or like purpler, is that a word? And then changing your vibrance, which indiscriminately changes the colors, kind of like exposure. If so, and then you have your saturation, which more finely tunes which colors have added saturation to them. You then have these 3 additional tabs within the color tab. You have your color mixer, which is used to just edit one particular color. So like I can turn this just the red all the way up or down, or change its hue, or change its luminance, or like how bright that color is. And you can see you can do this for any of these colors. Then you have your point color, which is kind of the same thing as the color mixer. You can change the hue and saturation and luminance and all of that, but you just kind of select which color. You click this little eye drop and you select which photo or which color you want to edit. Then you have your color grading, which you're probably not gonna use this, but if you need to color grade anything, then you can change your midtones, highlights, or um, your shadows. Another quick tip is generally in Lightroom, if you double click anything, then it'll just reset it, and so you don't have to like manually drag it back. It's usually a lot easier. But yeah, in terms of the color tab, you're mainly just going to be dealing with temperature, fixing that. If you shot in like a gym, then you might have, where it's generally a lot more orange, then you might have just need to turn the photo cooler to get more of that natural look, which is kind of our main priority, is not really making these crazy edits to photos, but just making them look as we were there in person, making them look natural, as if we were there ourselves. The next tab is effects. You're not really use this. You have your texture, clarity, dehaze, vignette, and grain. For grain, it might be a part of the photo, and there's a lot of stylistic choice of whether you actually like use grain or not. Generally, though, for Yearbook, we are not really wanting any grain. Again, we're just kind of wanting that natural look. Same reason why you don't really use like your vignettes. Now, dehaze and texture and clarity can kind of come in handy, depending on like kind of what the photo is, but you never, like, again, 90% of the time you never really need them. And then for detail, now detail depends on a lot whether you're shooting in JPEG or if you're shooting in RAW. Um, the If you're shooting in RAW, you're always gonna have more information than you will when you're shooting in JPEG, because JPEG is naturally compressed in a way. Um, but you have these three kind of options. You have your denoise, your raw details, your super resolution. These two are kind of just like these type of AI enhancer type of things, and then you have your denoise. So I'll let it play this little what would you call it? This little demonstration. Again, we really don't want noise. This is an AI denoise. So if you click it, it pops up with this little applying denoise and a progress bar and the estimated time. Some computers like mine, where I have a really good one, it can take 10, 30 seconds. Or if you're um, maybe on a slower school computer, then it could take up from a minute to, I've seen, like 10 minutes. Um, but this AI denoise feature is also only really available when you're shooting in RAW. That's one of the advantages, is that raw, and when you're shooting RAW photos, you have so much more control over what you're able to do with the photo. So we'll just let this finish. Awesome. So here, let me just, and you have these little eye icons, and if you hold them, you can hide any edits you made. So right now I'm holding the eye icon. You can see what it looks like without any denoise, and then you can see what it looks like with. You can see, especially in the background, it's a lot more clearer, and you definitely don't have as much noise. Now you want to be careful with this AI denoise, because you can kind of make people's skin look like butter, especially if you have it super high and like super smooth. Um, Human skin isn't smooth like butter. If you feel like your arm or your hand, you can feel all of these rough patches or unevenness to it. So you want to preserve that. Again, you're kind of wanting to keep this natural look. You're wanting to preserve that natural kind of like roughness. but you want to also get rid of as much noise as you can. You also have your manual noise reduction. So generally use this if you don't have your AI denoise, or if you just kind of want to like fine tune it. So you have two sections, one based on light and one based on color. You know, it's pretty simple. You just drag for how much you need. And then your next section here, optics. You're not really use this. I'm using more of a professional camera. I've bought in myself an A7R5 with school cameras and school lenses. I don't think that should really be using this. For optics, you're mainly gonna be getting rid of chromatic aberration, which, as it says here, reduces fringing around like sharp edges and around like bright lights. Then you have your lens correction, which I shoot on a Sigma 50mm prime f2. So it's automatically correcting, because my lens has software that just directly imports into Lightroom. The It's automatically correcting for any lens distortion that there might be. On a school lens, where it's definitely a lot more like budget, I don't believe that you have auto lens corrections. And generally, you don't even really need this. The auto lens correction is kind of just like a cherry on top you can think of. But if you are somehow shooting on a lens where you have lens corrections as a feature, then I would definitely make sure that it's on. Because you can't lose anything. You can only gain. Then you have your defringing. Um, the sometimes around kind of like the sharp edges and stuff. Or if it's like super bright, there can kind of be this outline of like purple and green. Um, and so you can just edit to get rid of that. Then for your next section, lens blur, this can add like virtual depth and lens blur. So it's important that you still shoot in the correct aperture, but if you ever want to enhance a photo, then you have your digital lens blur. You can add blur, but you can't generally take it away, which is important why you shoot at the correct aperture. So you have what type of bokeh you want, your amount that you want. You can click on this to visualize your depth, and then you can use this bar to see which parts of your image are in focus, which is within this, or out of focus. Or if you want, you can just move this slider so like you can see this super visually. If you want, you can kind of refine that, whether it'll be, you can refine it with this focus brush, or you can refine it with a blur brush. But generally, again, you're probably not really using lens blur. Again, you're kind of wanting this natural look. And then you have your crop section, so you click it or you can press C. Now this is really used to just enhance your photos. You want to be careful with how you're cropping everything. If you press X while in crop mode, then it'll automatically switch between portrait and a landscape crop. And you really just want, when you're cropping something, you really just want to think of how you're cropping it and the story that you're telling. So while you're cropping, let me close my door. So while you're cropping, the story that I'm with this shot right now is that there's this your fashion show going on. But if I crop it in more, maybe just this one person, then this is very much a different story. This is one person kind of like showing off. I have an edit that I left somewhere. Oh yeah, it's just these. Anyways, so just think about what story that you're trying to tell with it. And generally you want to try to keep the same aspect ratio. The kind of the general is that you're shooting on 3:2. So no matter how big or small you're cropping something, you see it won't expand past this point because at the bottom, um and so even if I drag it to the right, it's not going to crop to the right because it's trying to keep this 3:2 aspect ratio. Then you can just rotate it or flip it however you want. You can distort it and add kind of like this effect if you want. You're not going to be using any of these, but if you want, you can play around with it. And then there's your heal tool, which, yeah, I'll let it play the little video. It's kind of more just for like skin. And maybe again with like a pimple or something like that. You have your remove, which can use generative AI to remove anything that you're not wanting in a photo. And then you have your clone tool, which I'll just let this play, pretty self-explanatory. Pick a spot that you want to clone and then you clone it. So let's try this generative AI remove. So even with my crop, you can see that there's still this person's shoulder, and the story that I really want to tell is that this person is at this like fashion show, and it's really the story is just about her. So you have your generative AI on. You can remove or select what you've done with your brush. You click remove, and this will just kind of process kind of like the AI denoise from earlier. So you can see that did a great job. And then there's a little bit of this person's shoulder, so I'll just get rid of that and click remove. Let it process, and see that did a great job with that as well. Then you have your masking tool, which there are generally kind of these main three masks. So for your subject, your sky, your background. If you want, you can make this linear or radial gradient. I'll just let these little animations play. And then you can even choose based on the color or luminance range, or like your color and your light. You have your brush and certain objects or the landscape. So I'll select subject, and it'll create its subject up here. You can see in the red what it's selected, and then it's a little edit panel. So as you can see, any exposure changes I make only affects this mask. Any contrast changes I make are only in this mask. So that's definitely good to know. And just to delete it, you press on these three dots and you delete whatever mask it is. And then on the right here, you have your version history. So if you ever want to go back to original, you can just click on this. And at the bottom here, you generally want to have this on fit. You can choose whether to show photos at the bottom or not. And there are these 4 different modes. You can have your library, or like this, where it shows the name of the file and the photo. You can compare and edit or a certain photo, or you can just go in detail mode, which shows the whole photo. So that's kind of it for my editing kind of like tutorial. And yeah,